welcome. It's such a pleasure to be here to offer you a training as part of Dentrack. So wherever you are in the world and whatever time of day it is, welcome. I am Dr. Rana Al-Falaki. You can tell from the accent here, based in the UK. I am a specialist periodontist, a fellow of the College of General Dentistry, but in addition to that 25-year history in dentistry, and as a specialist, I am also an optimal performance strategist, which is what I'm talking to you about today. So, what is optimal performance and why on earth is it important to dentists? Well, over 86% of dentists have reported high levels of stress and felt and experienced burnout at some point in their lives, over 50% of you. So optimal performance is incredibly important, not just for you as an individual, for your health, but also for your team and how you happen to interact with them, the relationships that you have, and your business revenue. Because believe me, if you don't perform well, the studies show that your revenue reduces by over 20%. And therefore, obviously, conversely, you can have increased revenue as well as increased happiness with optimal performance. So optimal performance really is this level of wonderfully high success, but without the burnout. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, what I mean by that is you're probably familiar with the term high performance and peak performance, and you're probably thinking, well, surely that's where I need to be and I want to be. No is the answer. And the reason for that, again, is that studies show with high level, if you focus on high performance and peak performance, you actually experience burnout, isolation, loneliness, your relationships suffer, your health suffers, and ultimately depression. And low performance does exactly the same thing, because who wants to boast about not doing particularly well, right? So again, you're more likely to feel isolated and suffer with depression as well. So optimal performance is not average, and I have to get that across right now, because all the tips and strategies I'm going to be sharing with you to be an optimal performer and to increase your revenue and your productivity. Optimal performance is not average. What it is an ability to reach that peak even faster and to be able to truly sustain it. So to be able to keep it going, I call it turning yourself into a regenerative battery. And that's really very much where the stage that I have got to. So everything I'm going to share with you from my NAILET system and from the Academy at MedDent is all based around elements and strategies that I have systemized because I use them on myself, having burnt out several times and suffered in so many ways. So let's go on to the next slide, please, and let me tell you what optimal performance really is. So I call it a triad. You can see in this diagram, it's a little bit busy, but let me start you on the top left there, the circle. You can see the word productivity. So high levels of productivity. If we shift over to the right, you see the word happiness. And let's think of being a muse there. And balance is at the bottom. And I'd like to call that living. So the reason I call this the play model is we think productivity, living, which is your balance word, living everything in balance, because balance is not about just life and about work. It's about being able to balance everything in your life, including your personal development, your spiritual growth, your financial life, your social connections, your fun, as well as your career, professional development, and of course, family life and intimate relationships, and your health. Let's not forget that. So that's the living, that's that part of the play model. A is about amuse. So I've used the word happiness here because it's what people tend to understand most. But really, we're talking about bringing fun into every element of your life. And again, did you know that happiness is actually a performance indicator? You are 13 times more productive if you are happy. So let's think about our teams. Let's think about creating an environment of positivity. Let's think about being upbeat, high levels of energy. That's where we want to get you at a sustainable level, not these ups and downs and highs and lows and your mood always being determined by what's going on. Let that joy really bubble up inside of you. And then on the outside of this diagram, you can see I've got the word habits. So that is the why of the play model, all about yielding to habits. And that's what optimal performance is, right? High levels of productivity, amusement, living, but also needing to yield to habits, needing to change habits. And a habit is not just about how you behave, it's about how you think, it's about who you actually are. And through optimal performance, we need to change the habit of being yourself so that you are this new, wonderful, even better version. Think of it like, the most incredible Lamborghini or Ferrari. You've had an upgrade, and that's what we want to do for you. That's what optimal performance is. You'll also see in the rest of that Venn diagram the words flow, synergy, and joy. I don't have so much time to go into what they mean today, although we are going to touch on them in the next slide. But again, these are all elements of really high levels of energy and that feeling of wonderful inner peace that you have inside, that contentment, which ultimately, let's face it, it's what most of us are really looking for, even though we add labels like thinking that we want more revenue or another relationship. Why? Because they give us peace, joy, and security. Next slide, please. Wonderful. So I'm going to focus on one area briefly. I'm going to talk to you about productivity because it's what I hear about so often. So many of my clients, the dentists, the practice managers that I work with are often asking me, how on earth can I be more productive? And of course, Dentrack is an incredible tool to give you just that. But here's the but. You need to be able to be in the right mindset and ability to be able to take these kind of tools on board to then become more productive. So one of the things I like to introduce productivity as is think of it like a triad. And you can see in this diagram, we have focus, we have flow, and we have synergy. I would love to know, and I just want to ask you this question and think of it for yourself. Which do you think you have the hardest time achieving? Is it your ability to focus, which is about, being able to really concentrate, get a task done, remove all distractions from around you, and really apply yourself? Is it flow? So flow, you saw that in the previous diagram, this mixture of happiness and productivity. And so flow is very much about getting into flow state. It's often where we need to be when we're in deep work. It's often where we need to be when we are our most creative, when we're trying to engage, when we're trying to get people to buy into our ideas. But when you're in flow, time just flies. And yet at the same time as being incredibly productive, you also feel this amazing sense of joy, happiness, energy. It's just like getting downloads left, right, and center, and feel completely and utterly inspired. You can get so much done when you tap into flow, which is obviously something I teach the dentists I work with how to get to that point. And synergy is that third element that's so important for productivity. Synergy, think of synergy like 1 + 1 = 3. It's about how can we add amplitude, how can we add volume, how can we add value to what you're already doing. So you're putting in the effort and yet your results are massively amplified. So you put in results, it's like putting things into a slot machine. When you put things into a slot machine, those little pennies that you put into a slot machine, and suddenly out comes, another 50 because you've amplified it. You've put in one coin and you've got out 50 because you've won on those little slot machines. Of course, they do trick you, don't they? They trick you to to try and get you to put more money in. But think of that like synergy. So being able to amplify your results for the effort that you put in. And that really is a basic knowledge of what the productivity triad is. Obviously, again, through the Nail It and MedDent training, and hopefully when I can answer some questions for you live, I'll be able to give you a lot more tips about how you can increase these levels of focus, synergy, and flow. But master all three of them and you are a master of productivity, including being able to use Dentrack software. So next slide, please. So I keep mentioning this system, Nail It, and I spoke at the beginning how this was something that I myself had systemized because I myself had experienced very high levels of burnout. My relationships had broken down and I constantly found myself in a cycle. What kind of cycle? I found myself in this cycle of repeating the same patterns again and again. Now, this is something really important for you to think about. If you do the same things day in, day out and expect different results, then don't do the same things day in and day out. If you want something to change, you have to behave, act, or think differently, because that's the only way to get something different. And I was in a pattern. I was constantly in a pattern of always doing the same things, working really hard, and wondering, why didn't I have more time on my hands? Why was I working so hard and yet my revenue wasn't increasing? Why was I putting in all this tremendous effort and I was able to focus and yet I wasn't feeling any happier? And this is because constant repetition of patterns. And like I said at the beginning, you need to break the habit of being yourself. So Nail It consists of 6 systems. And I'm going to give you a little bit of a tip here about one particular element. So it's actually 38 components. And this is one of the systems called the Boundless Beliefs Method. So it's where we tackle this element of being truly limitless. Limitless means free, means completely free with no limits. There is no boundary. There is nothing stopping you from achieving whatever it is you wish to achieve. So you'll see at the bottom of this diagram, we have the word spelt out beliefs, and they are each different keys because every key of Nail It is another key to master optimal performance. But I'm going to talk about the E here, the E for empower, which is the second key. Now, what exactly is empower? We all have beliefs, right? I just told you, you all have habits, you all have ways of thinking and a belief system that makes you you. You as a human are literally a body of energy with a belief system that you would have adopted from when you were born, and still adopting beliefs today based on everything that you are exposed to, every experience that you have, everything that people tell you. And you choose whether to adopt these beliefs into your belief system, into your energetic state, or not. Now, empowering beliefs are about beliefs that push you forward rather than limit you. Now, if we talk about money, let's talk about money and productivity, okay? Let's think. You might have a limiting belief, in other words, a belief that stops you from moving forward. And it might be a limiting belief that I can't earn any more money unless I work 7 days a week. I mean, we hear that all the time now, don't we? Open your dental practice on a Saturday and on a Sunday and do shift work and let it be open for 12 hours. And how does that belief make you feel? Probably as a business owner, a little bit stressed until you work out you can get your associates to do it. All right, so that might be a limiting belief because it's stopping you from taking action. It's filling you with dread. It's creating some kind of stress. So what we'd want to do is get you to choose a more empowering belief. In other words, a belief that gets you to where you want to get to, a belief that pushes you forward to that goal, which is financial freedom, being able to actually work less but earn more. Sounds pretty cool, right? I might just add here that through Nail It, I increased, in fact, I doubled the turnover of my practice within the space of just 1 year by using every element of this system. So back to empower. What is a more empowering belief when we're thinking about that? Well, a more empowering belief might be something along the lines of I am able to generate revenue for my practice and still have a balanced life. How does that feel when you say that? So when you choose an empowering belief, you need to just sit with it and just think, how does that make me feel? If it makes you feel a little bit calmer, a little bit less stressed, fantastic, then you know you're on the right path. So I'm going to take you through a little system of empower, a little subsystem. So if we can have the next slide, please. But the first tip I need to let you know is when you're choosing these empowering beliefs, they cannot be simply the reverse. In other words, I can't say, "Oh, I'm busy. I'm not too busy," because the word doesn't hear the word "not." In other words, you can't just shift your limiting belief into an empowering belief by adding or removing the word not, because the brain isn't interested in it. It will hear any sentence, but without necessarily the negative connotation. So it needs to be a complete change of vocabulary, because if you're using a sentence that is almost the same words, but you've just changed one or two of them, the brain, just like when we walk into a room, and after a while we stop recognizing things, or we walk into a room that smells, and after a minute we can't smell that smell anymore, hopefully a nice smell. The brain gets used to things, and it's trying to preserve its own energy, so it shuts out various stimuli. So we want a sentence that has enough variety in it and is not simply the polar opposite. So next slide, please. All right, so let's use this system called LESS. All right, it's about calling for backup. So if your core limiting belief is let's talk about productivity. I mentioned one about just now about money. Let's talk about productivity. It's a classic one, isn't it? When you need to take on new tasks, it's like, I'm too busy. I'm too busy to get to know how to use Dentrack. So you'll buy it and then you don't use it. Shame on you. It's a brilliant piece of software. All right, so what can we do? So that it might be, I'm too busy. So remember, you can't turn around and say, I'm not too busy, because brain isn't interested. So your new empowering belief then needs to be something along the lines of, I always have enough time for what is important to me. So did you notice what I did there? I created a sentence that was completely different wording and felt very open. I always have enough time for what is important to me. How does it feel? Quite nice, right? It feels like it's possible. So that is what an empowering belief is. Now, it needs backup. We got to support it, because we just erected it, and we got to support it, and we got to find a way to turn it into your core, which again is something we work with clients to make sure you truly embed this into your being. But you need a supplemental belief. So let's add some other beliefs to that to really see how we can generate this and amplify this and get excited about it. So the new belief has become, I have more than enough time for what's important to me. So your supplemental belief could be, what's important to me is my health, having enough energy, maintaining really high energy, good relationships with my family and my team members, being able to integrate software into my practice so that my entire team benefits and we find ourselves having more time to engage in other things that are important. Another supplemental belief, what's important to me, increasing my revenue by 10% by the end of this quarter, so that I can reward my staff and take more time off. Oh my goodness, don't these beliefs feel great? They just energize you and they excite you, and it's a way to start embedding. So that's a little tip for you. If you haven't written it down, write it down now. Less, although less is more in this case. Your limiting belief, add an empowering belief, and then a supplemental belief on top. So a couple of other things, just when we're talking about teams, because of course Dentrack works with teams and tries to bring teams together. So I'm just going to touch on a couple of other points before we finish. So next slide, please. I want to introduce you briefly to something that we call the 5 behaviors. So a little bit of homework for you is start thinking about how much your team demonstrates these behaviors. Now, this is taken from a book, and I am Wiley. Most of you would have heard of Wiley being in the scientific field. Of course, they publish so many journals for us, don't they? So this is a very, very heavily and well-researched assessment called the 5 behaviors of a cohesive team. And we have different types of assessments. One is a team assessment for small teams up to 12 who work intimately together. And we have another assessment, which is a personal development assessment for larger teams, such as corporates and groups of practices. And what they found from the research, which is why they develop this assessment, is that when teams are not performing well, it's typically because of a lack of these behaviors, starting with the base of that triangle. So I would ask you, how much trust do you and your team have for each other? because we want to get you to results. This is how you incorporate Dentrack software, and this is how you get to increasing your revenue and cutting down the days that you work at the same time. So typical examples, if trust is missing within a team, may be that each person is out for themselves, each person does their task but doesn't want to do anybody else's tasks. People don't tend to speak up and just stay quiet instead. You can get that kind of a bitchy atmosphere where everybody starts gossiping. So first you need to have trust. The next thing is conflict, and you're thinking, why would we want the team to have conflict? That's exactly what we don't want. But you do. And what we're talking about here is what we call healthy conflict. So conflict where each person can call each other out in a safe space, where team members can make suggestions about how to progress the team and come up with different ideas because they know that they are not going to be ridiculed. The only way they can come up with those kind of suggestions and really voice themselves is, of course, by having the foundation of trust. The next behavior, of course, is commitment. How do you get your entire team to commit? So this is about buy-in. And if you've had healthy conflict, it means everybody's had a chance to have their say, which means they're much more likely to be committed. Now, of course, there are about 15 different strategies I could share with you, perhaps when I'm on a Q&A with you, about how else you can get buy-in in a team, how you can influence and persuade and get people to do what it is you want. But the behavior we want here is about real team commitment, where everybody is brought in to the collective vision. So what is your vision? And have you shared that with your team? Have you shared the vision of your team to your team of exactly what it is you want your practice to be or practices? The next bit is accountability. And this one is amazing. Whenever I do the assessment, I find how teams are really lacking on this. And often all the pressure ends up on the practice manager or the practice owner. Well, guess what? Don't you want to get on with your job and stop having everybody answering to you and stop having all the hassles and the firefighting instead? Well, then you need accountability within your team. So what does that mean? That means that every single team member holds each other accountable. If you've got one nurse who hasn't done her instruments, and then you call them out on it. If you've got somebody who said that they were going to fill in the gaps in your appointment diary and they didn't do it, another team member is going to call them out on it. It's not just up to the associate or the practice manager or the principal to go and ask that receptionist why that hadn't been done. Everybody holds each other accountable, and everybody calls each other out. How can they do that? Because they've had healthy conflict and they have huge amounts of trust. And the result, well, the result is the pinnacle of that triangle, right? This is about team results. This isn't just that the associate grossed a certain amount and no one else did, and they didn't care about anyone else as long as they had the best nurse and the best instruments. No, this isn't about each person out for themselves. This is about the collective vision, the collective results, because everybody's bought in. And the result of that is you can then reward everybody accordingly also. So next slide, please. So the team assessment is driven by certain personalities. And again, through part of the MedDent training in the academy, we train people in a very, very in-depth way to truly understand multiple personality types and how best to get the best out of them, how to communicate with them, how to approach conflict with them, how to motivate them, how to reward them. So much of it is based on personality types, which the assessment is ultimately driven by. But what you end up in a team is you end up knowing exactly what personality type every member of your team is, and realizing that you don't speak to one person the way you speak to the other if you want to get the best out of them. I mean, I could spend hours on the team report alone, and we definitely don't have that. We just have a couple of minutes at best. But I just wanted to share with you that your report would be individualized to you. So it also tells you how do you approach conflict? How do you approach commitment? What is the best way for you to find your motivators and rewards, and the team work together for that collective vision? So next slide, please. So another thing that we teach, other than just personality types, is about energy types. Now, again, this is a very, very complex subject, so I'd be delighted to answer questions for you. But we use these energy types in terms of recognizing people's language. Now, that might be the language that our patients use, because when they use these certain types of language, it helps us to actually be able to increase our sales and our conversions. And it also helps you to know who you want to employ as well, because again, this is assessment based. And sometimes when someone turns up for an interview, they can say whatever they like, right? They've got model answers. What you don't know is exactly what their attitude and their behavior is, particularly when they are under stress. And we know that when you're in dentistry, you are under stress. Are you a team player? Are you someone who always looks for the positive? Are you someone who can always shift into opportunity? Are you someone who looks for an everybody wins? Are you somebody who engages in gratitude? Or are you somebody who is, woe is me? Everything happened to me. It's so unfair. It's all your fault. It's fine. Those last few things that I just said are very much associated with energy levels 1, 2, and 3, which are what we call catabolic energy, destructive energy. And we know that when you have that destructive type of energy, well, other than for you as an individual, you're much more likely to feel depressed, not be productive, suffer in your relationships, certainly not be of an abundant state, and not very healthy either. Versus the other side, levels 4, 5, 6, and 7, which is what we call anabolic energy, constructive, building, synthetic. And it's about your level of consciousness. And that's where you are super productive and much more successful. So again, you can measure these levels of energy for you as an individual, for you as a team. Like I said, I used to use it on team members when I would employ them for my practice and think, is this person the right type of person for me? Do they have the right type of energy? So again, if we have the next slide, please. From this assessment, it actually gives us a score, which is about your level of consciousness. And again, I'm a scientist, right? So this assessment has been heavily researched. And what it's found is depending on your value, and you need to be over a level of 3.35, then the studies have shown that you have far more success and fulfillment in 14 different areas of your life presented on this slide. So your communication skills, your leadership ability, your energy, your personal freedom, how engaged you are at work, your productivity, your family relationships, your spiritual connection, financial success, time management, health and wellness, work-life balance, intimate relationships, and working relationships. So the top of the slide talks about be more, and that's what this is all about. It's about being more, because we have to shift you inside, shift the habit of you to get more outside. In other words, if we shift what's inside, we have much more beautiful results outside at a sustainable level. So last slide, please, with 30 seconds to go for you. So just to say that you can use this energetic model. This is what we call energy leadership. And we can use this model in so many different ways in how we communicate with our patients, how we communicate with our teams. And again, obviously through MedDent, and very happy to answer questions live. We use this model to increase your sales, your conversions. And I tell you, when I employ someone, I also know if they're going to be a good converter. Remember, as a periodontal practice, I would employ an associate. They might be brilliant with their hands, but if they can't convert, and I've worked so hard to get those new consultations in, I want that patient to take up treatment. Well, then I need to train and up-level my associates through this energy model. So increase sales and conversions, increase your productivity, and increase your staff morale, because again, the studies show if we have high staff morale, you increase engagement, productivity, and ultimately revenue. Let's not forget staff retention and less absenteeism, as well as that's what keeping your team members happy is all about. Therefore, you increase the revenue in all these indirect ways as well by over 36%. So very, very powerful stuff. Wow, I have given you so much information. I'm so looking forward to being able to answer questions for you live when I meet you. But I hope you've taken some notes and start using some of these strategies and thinking about how is it you behave? How is it do you think at the moment? And what can you do with every single interaction that you have so that you shift yourself? So let me end with a quote, right? Be more, do less. We are, after all, human beings, not human doings. Thank you so much for your time today, and have a great day.